Welcome, students. This is the Center for Social Concerns training on recommendations for engaging with Baltimore communities as a Hopkins student. The purpose of this training is to prepare you to ethically and responsibly begin your work in Baltimore City. Our hope is that you will leave this training with an increased awareness of the context of your engagement and some tools to help you navigate your experience working with communities. Please note that this training is by no means comprehensive or complete and should evolve as we grow and adapt to an ever-changing social landscape. This training will take approximately 40 minutes to complete. In order to get the most out of your experience, we do ask that you watch this video only when you can be fully focused and present. Please find a quiet space and grab some headphones. We'll also be pausing frequently to hold space for personal reflection, so please make sure you have a pen and paper or some other way to take notes. Before we dive in, let's take a moment to acknowledge the indigenous land that Johns Hopkins University is built upon. Giving a statement of land acknowledgement is considered a common best practice at the beginning of public events, community gatherings, and speeches or lectures. It is intended as a way of encouraging critical self-reflection and resisting the erasure of Native peoples and history of colonialism in the United States. The following acknowledgement was sourced from True JHU, the Hopkins Grad Union. We live and work on the unceded land of the Piscataway people. We ask you to join us in acknowledging the Piscataway community, their elders both past and present, as well as future generations. We also acknowledge that Johns Hopkins was founded upon the exclusions and erasures of many indigenous peoples, including those on whose land this institution is located. This land was stolen from the Piscataway people through the direct and indirect violence of settler societies, colonialism, and genocide, historical processes of dispossession which are ongoing. We make this acknowledgement to honor indigenous peoples and to disrupt our complacency as participants in and beneficiaries of colonial systems. We encourage you to continue learning and reflecting by exploring resources like nativeland.ca and nativegov.org. Let's start with a quick opening reflection to help ground us in this virtual space. Take a minute to consider the following prompts. What motivated you to participate in this program of the Center for Social Concern? What are you hoping to get out of your experience? What comes to mind when you think about Baltimore City? What are some things you've heard people say about Baltimore? What do you know about Hopkins's relationship with Baltimore City? How might that affect the way you show up in communities? What communities will you be working with? What do you know about them? wrap up your thoughts and keep your responses close. We'll revisit them later on in this training. Before we begin any kind of community-engaged activity, it's critical that we do our homework and are aware of the context we are operating within. This is especially relevant for us as Hopkins affiliates working in Baltimore because our university has an incredibly complex relationship with the city. Johns Hopkins University and Health System has an expansive reach across the city, and many community members have strong feelings about the institution, both positive and negative. Johns Hopkins is also the #1 private employer in Baltimore, as well as the state of Maryland, which means many people you encounter will be actively employed by the institution. Hopkins is celebrated for boundary-breaking innovation, academic excellence, and world-renowned medical care. For many folks in Baltimore City, especially Black communities, Hopkins also has a reputation for exploitative research practices and predatory community development that results in displacement and gentrification. We encourage you to continue learning about this relationship by exploring the resources listed at the end of this training. The title of this training articulates a relationship dynamic between Baltimore communities, in the plural, and Hopkins student. As a student participating in a program of JHU's Center for Social Concern, it's important to be aware of the fact that you are a player in a higher education context. In the world of higher education, the community engagement relationship dynamic is often characterized as being between the university, or the institution, and the community. This can sometimes result in all external entities being lumped into one big category, the community. However, communities are not homogeneous, and Baltimore City is certainly not a monolith. A community is any group of people that has some shared characteristic or lived experience and can be broken down by things like neighborhood, identity, values, and interests. Baltimore City is comprised of many diverse and vibrant communities, all with their own distinct experiences and identities. That means that part of our homework is to first identify which community, specifically, we are going to be engaging with, and then learn as much as we can about them. In the same way that we want to be specific and intentional about naming who we are working with, we also want to be mindful of the role that we play in this relationship dynamic, because our identity also matters and affects how we interact with communities. Our identity is multifaceted and intersectional and comprised of a number of different characteristics that can include race, gender identity, sexual orientation, religion, socioeconomic status, and more. When we work in Baltimore City, it's important to keep in mind that being a Hopkins student is also a key part of our identity. Our affiliation with Hopkins will likely signify something to the folks we work with, which might affect how we are perceived. This is an important characteristic of the relationship dynamic between Hopkins students and Baltimore communities. The recommendations outlined in this training are intended as preliminary offerings to help us start to navigate this context in a responsible and intentional way. Recommendation number 1. Adopt an asset-based mindset. Let's start by revisiting one of the prompts from our opening reflection. What comes to mind when you think about Baltimore City? What have you heard people say about Baltimore? Take a moment to review your response. Sometimes people respond to this prompt with words like crime, gun violence, corruption, or poverty. Indeed, a lot of folks only hear about Baltimore from shows like The Wire or when some local tragedy makes national headlines. The dominant narratives of Baltimore City tend to be deficit-based, focusing primarily on problems and needs. Our first recommendation is all about shifting this paradigm to adopt an asset-based approach. An asset-based approach focuses on the strengths, abilities, resources, and talents that exist within the community. Rather than focusing on what is missing or lacking, we instead focus on what already exists that can be built upon. Assets can be economic, physical, social, cultural, essentially anything that helps a community thrive. Take a few seconds to call to mind the things that make your community strong. Maybe it's a local restaurant or green space. Or maybe it's a neighborhood association or art center. These are all examples of types of assets. Another important feature of adopting an asset-based approach is broadening the way we engage with communities. Your work as a volunteer, intern, or tutor is meaningful and can make a big difference, but it is equally important that you challenge yourself to engage with communities outside of just a service context. If you only interact with members of the community when you are there to, quote, help, it can reinforce a deficit mindset because the context of your engagement is oriented around problems. You might only be interacting with folks at low points of their lives. The thing is, people in Baltimore, especially Black communities here, have been surviving, caring for each other, and building strategies of self-reliance since the beginning of time, and they will continue to do so after you move on. At this stage of your journey, we invite you to consider expanding your engagement to also include activities like eating at local restaurants, supporting small businesses, visiting museums and theaters, or going to community events and gatherings. Baltimore has a number of serious challenges, many of which can be traced back to racist policies and structural inequities that we encourage you to learn more about by exploring the resources at the end of this training. Baltimore is also a historic city with a vibrant arts, culture, and food scene, and a blossoming tech and social entrepreneurship sector. The communities here are filled with welcoming, hardworking, and resilient people. Adopting an asset-based approach helps us see a fuller picture and ensures that we don't view social challenges as a series of problems we alone can solve. Our next two recommendations are inspired by the principles of cultural humility, a framework originally developed to help medical professionals more inclusively work with diverse populations. As the name of the framework suggests, these recommendations are fundamentally all about humility. Let's start with recommendation number 2. Practice lifelong learning and critical self-reflection. Responsibly engaging with communities, especially those that might be different from you, is not a finite journey or a skill you can master and be done with. Instead, it requires a willingness to challenge yourself and continuously grow. Practicing lifelong learning and critical self-reflection means naming and recognizing a few things. First, we all make assumptions and have our own biases. Second, there is always more to learn, especially from folks with lived experiences that are different from ours. Third, everyone has their own unique intersectional identities. These identities mean that we all have different lenses through which we view the world. Make it a practice to regularly check in with yourself before, during, and after your experiences working in the community. Let's take a moment now to reflect. Consider how you might apply the concepts of lifelong learning and critical self-reflection to the following prompts. Which of your identities most shapes the lens through which you view the world? Which community will you be working with? What are some assumptions you have about this community? Take a few more seconds to wrap up your thoughts, and we'll move on to our next recommendation. Recommendation number 3. Recognize and challenge power imbalances. This recommendation requires us to first acknowledge that there will likely be some kind of power imbalance in the relationship dynamic between you, a Hopkins student, and a member of the community you engage with, especially when the context of your engagement is a direct service activity. This power imbalance might be due to a difference in age, socioeconomic class, education level, ability, influence, or just different life circumstances. Let's imagine some common volunteer activities. Maybe you're tutoring a young child or serving meals to an unhoused individual. Where might there be power imbalances in that relationship? How might your position as a Hopkins student contribute to that dynamic? Recognizing and challenging power imbalances asks us to do 3 things. First, be mindful of our own privileges in any situation. This is especially relevant for us as Hopkins affiliates engaging in Baltimore City. In addition to receiving a world-class education, being a Hopkins student grants you access to resources, networks, and spaces that a lot of folks in Baltimore do not have access to. This can be a type of privilege. Second, challenge the unidirectional helper dynamic that is common in volunteering and direct service activities. Resist the urge to assume you're entering a situation to help, fix, or solve somebody's problem. Instead, how might you work to cultivate a mutually beneficial relationship with the individuals you work with? How might you see them as a whole person, with dreams and fears for the future, good days and bad, talents and weaknesses, just like you? Third, respect lived experiences as much as traditional forms of expertise. People are authorities on their own experience, and their expertise should be considered just as, if not more important, than something we can learn in a book or classroom. Before we move on to our next recommendation, take a moment to reflect. What are some privileges you have as a Hopkins student? How might that affect your relationship with the Baltimore communities you are working with? How might you challenge yourself to learn from the community you will be working with? Okay, let's move on to our 4th and final recommendation. Recommendation number 4. Accept multiple perspectives and embrace both and thinking. Our final recommendation is all about getting comfortable with the fact that community-engaged work is nuanced, complex, and always changing. When we engage with diverse populations filled with individuals who have varied intersectional identities and different lived experiences, we are navigating a context where multiple voices and perspectives are valid and should be respected. There is very rarely one answer, one truth, or a clear-cut right and wrong. Indeed, oftentimes we will encounter concepts that are seemingly in direct tension with one another. Instead of trying to easily resolve the tension by deciding that either one thing is correct or the other thing is correct, we encourage you to consider both and thinking. What does it look like to lean into that tension, wrestle with the discomfort, and embrace the notion that many things might be true all at the same time? Take a few moments to reflect on some of the tensions we named in this training. Are there things we covered that make you uncertain about what to feel or what opinion to have? Maybe you're thinking through the complex relationship between Johns Hopkins and Baltimore City. How might you feel both proud of your school and humbled by its history with the community? Or maybe you're processing our recommendations for ethical engagement. How might you both work to address social challenges and celebrate the strengths of communities? Accepting multiple perspectives and embracing both and thinking allows us to validate the experiences of folks we are in community with and challenges us to lean into tension and discomfort. This will help us develop our ability to think critically and move through ambiguity in accordance with our values. Before we wrap up, let's take a moment to review where we've been. We started off by naming the importance of understanding the context of our engagement in Baltimore City. Then, we talked through 4 recommendations that the Center for Social Concern asks you to consider when you work with communities. Adopting an asset-based approach, practicing lifelong learning and critical self-reflection, recognizing and challenging power imbalances, and accepting multiple perspectives and embracing both and thinking are some tools that will prepare you to begin ethically and responsibly engaging with Baltimore communities as a Hopkins student. Let's close with a final reflection. Consider the program you are participating in. Can you articulate the context of your engagement? What is one way you might put these recommendations into practical application? We encourage you to continue learning and reflecting by exploring the resources on the next few slides and staying engaged with the Center for Social Concern. If you have any questions or just want to connect, please don't hesitate to reach out by emailing us at volunteer@jhu.edu. Thank you for taking the time to complete this training and for your commitment to our community. The following books, articles, and websites helped inform the content of this training and are excellent resources to explore as you continue learning about Baltimore.